to put on. Oh, thank you. Yes. Got it. So we're really excited to host this newsletter webinar. As you know, a few weeks back, we had the original bootcamp, publications bootcamp, and we focused on all of the various sort of publication opportunities within the section, which of course includes the journal and the year in review, and the ILN, which Kelly is very much involved with. And in fact, Kelly participated in that presentation as well. And I think it was a great, and books, right, a great overview to the various publications opportunities within the section. And we briefly discussed newsletters with the idea that we would hold this special newsletter webinar because the newsletter is really, is the publication of the committees. And there's a lot, for the committees to do. And we have some really fabulous newsletters from a variety of committees that are all housed on the ILS website, and we'll be sharing that link to you with you in just a little bit, so you can actually see where all the newsletters are kept. But we think there's a lot more information to share with respect to newsletters, and so we wanted to host this separate webinar. We've got three fabulous folks with us today who are doing some really great work with the newsletters of their own committees, who are going to be sharing sort of hot tips and special ideas of how you might get started, either launching a newsletter from scratch if your committee has not yet published one, and or just ideas for how you might change some things up a little bit with respect to your newsletters. We do want to just make, sort of emphasize how the newsletter is really such an important component, I think, of the work of the general committees. It's a great way to communicate from the committee to your members and have the members communicate with each other. We're going to be talking about sort of the types of content you can have in the newsletters, and it's quite varied, and really provides a great communication tool. In addition, of course, it's an educational tool, and it really sort of demonstrates and can highlight some of the great expertise of your members with respect to the articles and such that they might write and publish in the newsletter. So it's really sort of a win-win for everybody, getting the newsletter out, communication and education and public sort of publicizing, the work of our members and the ABA, because you, of course, can share the newsletter not only with your committees and your committee members, but as we said, with the entire section, to educate those of us that aren't as familiar with your subject matter area and are still in the international section. And you can share beyond, right, our section, beyond even within the ABA or outside the ABA. So it's a really wonderful tool, and we're hoping that this will help you sort of get started thinking about publishing your newsletter, and or just working to sort of incorporate some different ideas if you're already publishing a newsletter. So with that, what I'd like to do is introduce our esteemed panelists, and then we're going to sort of proceed in a conversational mode. We've decided to sort of organize our discussion around sort of three main topics. And so we're going to have some individual questions around those three topics. And each of our panelists will sort of discuss their ideas in response to those sort of general questions within each topic. And then at the end, we'll definitely leave time for any questions from the rest of you. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat, or obviously this is a small, intimate group here, and we put it, we're not in a webinar style because we wanted to sort of see folks. Feel free to be on video if you wish to be. That would be fine. If not, that's fine too. But if you have questions, like I said, you can either put it in the chat and we'll get to them at the end, or you can just at the end, raise your hand and you can ask them yourself. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for today. And we'll get started. This is both in order, in alphabetical order, as well as in order of presentation. I'd like to first introduce Kelly Blount. She's the editor-in-chief of the International Law News, vice chair for publications of the Lawyers Abroad Committee, senior advisor for the Young Lawyers Interest Network, and co-chair of the Middle East Committee. She's licensed to practice in New York and New Jersey and holds a PhD in law from the University of Luxembourg with a focus in criminal law. And she currently resides in Luxembourg with her family. Next, we'll be hearing from Kelsey Quigley. She is a senior associate at WilmerHale, based in Silicon Valley, California. Her practice focuses on representing individuals and organizations involved in investigations, enhancing regulatory compliance, and complex litigation. She currently serves as a co-chair of the American Bar Association's International Law Section Mexico Committee. And before that, she was an editor of the award-winning Mexico Committee newsletter and an editor of the section's Law Mexico Year in Review. Outside of work, Kelsey enjoys running, surfing, backpacking, yoga, and traveling, as she says often, to section events. And then last but certainly not least, is Andres Nieto. He focuses his practice on banking and finance law, capital markets, fintech, corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and arbitration. He represents business groups, financial institutions, and private equity funds in transactions related to mergers and acquisitions, corporate financing, secured financing, and syndicated lending, reorganizations, restructurings, and workouts, and regulatory compliance, and particularly anti-money laundering. He also represents issuers and investment banks in a broad range of public and private transactions, including initial public offerings, secondary offerings, and cross-border securities offerings. With more than 20 years of experience, he also represents clients in commercial arbitration, having participated as an arbitrator in proceedings administered by the main administrative institutions. And in addition to his private practice, he is a professor of capital markets law and letters of credit at the Universidad Panamericana. He also actively promotes pro bono and diversity and inclusion initiatives and is co-chair for the Mexico Committee of our section. So as you can see, we've got three fabulous folks here who are going to be sharing their expertise. So we're going to begin with the topic of selecting content and topics for the newsletter. And Kelly is going to be the lead for this. As she said, she is an editor of the Middle East Committee newsletter and is, of course, active, I think, with the Young Lawyers Network as well. So Kelly, let's begin with content. What type of content do you think people can include in these newsletters? What are your thoughts?
So thank you, Joan. This is a really fantastic program, and I appreciate you organizing it. As regards content, in my experience, it very much depends on the committee. And so in the three committees with which I am active in the newsletters, it varies quite a bit. So I think that you need a balance, of course, because you want to keep in mind your timeline, which I think we'll talk about, as well as how long you want it to be, et cetera. But for instance, in the Middle East Committee, we have a region in which all of us are somehow involved or practicing. And so substantive content in terms of legal updates or cases are always going to be relevant to most people. If you go to Young Lawyers Interest Network, or you go to the Lawyers Abroad Committee, we have a shared competency in that we fit into some category, except we're all practicing different areas and we're all doing different things. And so in that situation, I would say that we could look more at practical tips. And so one of the things that I'm just going to say Yin because it's easier, that Yin does in their newsletter is interview senior members of the ABA and talk to them about their journey, because that can be useful for any member of Yin. We have a similar approach with the Lawyers Abroad Committee because there are practical tips for lawyers who are practicing abroad. Maybe they are still American citizens, their spouses are not, they have different tax obligations, their practices are affected for these reasons. And so really the content should be catered around the membership. And so I think that you really have a lot of leeway to determine that scope. And I think you really need to think about the shared interest of the members.
Great. Now, I guess thinking about topics for the articles, right? How do you get ideas for whether they're substantive articles or other articles? Like I said, you might solicit them from your members. Do you suggest them? Do you ask colleagues on the team, or is it primarily like a result of the author themselves who's just interested in writing? Or how do you sort of come up with those ideas?
Again, it depends on the committee and what length you're looking for, the type of content that you're looking for. In the Middle East Committee, for instance, we often leave it open for authors to submit something that's of interest to them and where they're an expert. An exception would be when we might have a special edition newsletter in which we want to focus on a certain topic. And we had published one this past January on the International Day of the Endangered Lawyer. And in that case, we suggested topics that individuals might cover because we thought that would give a very wide range around the topic that we chose. At the same time, we're not closed off to accepting other related topics. So I think in that way, you really can choose whether or not you want to leave it open or if you want to focus on something specific. In the case of Lawyers Abroad or Yin, both newsletters have reoccurring sections or segments. And so, like I mentioned, the senior member interview section, that's one that we try to have recurring every month. And so we can fill in maybe a substantive topic, but we also know that there are certain places that we want to make sure are included. And the same with Lawyers Abroad Committee. We want to have something that's very practical for all members of the committee, regardless of whether they're practicing tax law or international criminal law. It varies so much that, again, I think really the committee should drive what exactly you want to cover.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, do you reach out to your members to solicit their ideas? Is that sort of how you communicate to find out what you want to do with the newsletter, or like poll them?
Really,
or
I mean,
yeah.
It depends. I mean, again, with the Middle East Committee, we often just publish a call for submissions and give the guidelines of what might be accepted in terms of formatting and length and substance. But when it comes to Lawyers Abroad or Yin, we often also have somebody in mind who we might want to ask because we know that they have some valuable expertise to be included. But at the same time, I don't know of any newsletter that I've worked on where we would turn somebody away.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's that balance. So knowing what you want and who you might ask, but also welcoming other contributions.
Right. And I think, we also thought about the target audience, right? And I think you're going to say the same thing. A lot of it is a function of the specific committee, right? But it sounds like even within, say, a substantive committee that isn't clearly like, young lawyers or whatever, do you think, I mean, like in the Middle East Committee, do you like target, for example, student members perhaps, or young lawyer members, in addition to more advanced members, or not, when it's there isn't sort of an obvious audience that everybody happens to be, for example, young lawyers? Do you know what I mean?
No, that's a good point. So we do try to target younger members. We are making a push to try to reach out to members who might be less engaged generally, but we think might, because they're law students or because they're newly engaged with the committee or with the ABA, that they would have an interest in getting their work published. And so we also, there's some targeting, and we have been actively working on our outreach with law students. So that's important, I think, for all committees, not just GN. But we also share this information on our LinkedIn pages, on our Facebook pages. And so really, it's not just about offering that opportunity to students or to other individuals, which also, of course, benefits the wider membership of the committee, but it's also about networking and providing more of an open space for the community within the committee.
Great. And we mentioned sort of length and frequency. Again, I know that can be very wide, right? But how do you sort of decide length and frequency of your newsletters?
I think, frankly, it comes down to the amount of content that you can put together. So Yin, for instance, puts together a very comprehensive newsletter, and it does so every other month. But I also know that the leadership is also very active in helping to create this content. With the Middle East Committee, for instance, we usually only have about 5 articles in the newsletter, but they're all much longer and more substantive. And so that newsletter might be 30 pages, but there are 5 authors contributing. And so it's more realistic that we might publish 2 or 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. With Lawyers Abroad, we are looking for something very short, very concise, very digestible, and based around practical tips. And so it's a lot easier for us to publish something more frequently. And so in that case, we look at something to be more quarterly based. So Again, I think it's just a matter of practicality, but also it depends on the type of newsletter that you want to publish. If you want something long and substantive or short and digestible, because also you want the audience to be interested in reading it. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. Right. Thank you so much. Kelsey, Andres, did you have anything that you sort of wanted to add to any other thoughts that you had when you heard Kelly sort of responding to some of the questions? You had any other thoughts for topic and content of your newsletters?
I mean, aside from any additional comment from Kelsey, I would say that, I mean, I strongly agree with Kelly. At the end, it depends on the committee. We have the good fortune that fantastic experts have been passed, have the responsibility to take the newsletter under their wing, as Patrick Del Duca or Kelsey herself, that she has done a fantastic work on this. And we always try to encourage our members to write on topics that will be appealing for, obviously, the Mexican committee, the Mexicans, but that has some international aspect, right? I mean, we know that this newsletter is for the international law section, and it's important for us to create content or to publish content that has some international connection. Probably it could be regional, it could be bilateral, it could be for the whole world interest. But we try to encourage our membership to do that, to take some topics that probably would be very important for Mexico itself, but not just for Mexico, but Mexico with a connection with the international concept of countries, right? So I think that's an important feature for us. I don't know if Kelsey has any other thoughts.
I have a question for Kelly, actually. Something you said sparked an idea for me. When is you mentioned, I wrote it down, the National Day of the Endangered Lawyer?
Yeah, the International Day of the Endangered Lawyer. It's, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth. It's January 24th. If I'm wrong, it's January 21st.
That sounds like a fascinating topic.
Sometime in January, yeah.
It's that week. So every year there's a different country focus. Last year was Afghanistan. So, and I think our newsletter was about 80 pages.
Yeah.
So
it was quite impressive. I remember seeing it, and it was really quite an impressive work. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you have individuals that are willing to like contribute to something that's that large and comprehensive, I think that it's also a really good way to get community engagement from members.
Yeah.
That is, I was just going to say, one of the things that I feel most strongly about in this newsletter, and that is our job as international lawyers, is supporting the rule of law throughout the world, which, as we know, is threatened throughout the world, including in Mexico, as Andres knows personally. So I just encourage folks to think about the newsletter not only as an opportunity to give folks the space to write, but also to uphold the rule of law worldwide, which is our task as lawyers.
Yeah. Great.
And just, sorry, to add on that, and I think that that's a great answer, but we also know that the newsletter is important, not just for academic pieces, but also to communicate what we are doing in the Mexico committee and how we are participating within the international law section. So we also try to always include some participation of the members in any of the sessions or events that the international law sections hold around the world, whether it's the annual meeting or specific meetings that are happening throughout the world. That is important also for us to let the members know what are we doing in which events are participating, and also try to include some pics or photographs of that event. So I think it's also an important communication tool for communicate from the committee all the activities that we are doing within the time frame of the newsletter.
Yeah. And, Kelly mentioned like having some interviews with senior attorneys for younger attorneys, but also I know a lot of committees do like just a member spotlight, right? Someone who's just kind of an interesting person on your committee and, just giving them an opportunity to talk about their work or what they do. And that gets, that's also an opportunity for members to get to know each other, right? Right. Along the whole just communication, not just all about education per se, substantive education, right? Great. These are great ideas. The bottom line, I think, for everybody on the line here is, you can make the newsletter from a topic content standpoint, anything that works well for your members, right? It's sort of understanding what your members want and what would be useful for them. So Kelsey, let's turn to sort of our second area, which is related, but slightly of a different tilt, I guess. And this is how to attract and motivate members, right, to really get involved, right, to either research, write, edit, and otherwise contribute to the newsletter. Because I think, as Kelly said, part of it, the length and the timing of it is also a function of just who you can get to work on the newsletter. So let's sort of think about some of the ideas. First, I guess, soliciting member participation, right? How many people do you have, for example, on your committee working on the newsletter, and how do you get them? How do you attract them and get them involved?
We are very lucky on the Mexico committee to have a relationship with a local university in Mexico, the Universidad Panamericana de Guadalajara. And the students from that university are our primary authors. And it's a terrific pipeline, not only for their continued work with the committee, but also for their membership on the committee. And we have really an angel who is our liaison with the university, Carla. And she is joined by Eduardo and Nicole, who are our co-editors, and they really are the lifeblood of the newsletter. But I do want to say the newsletter would not have existed without the visionary work of a former member, dearly departed member, Patrick Del Duca, who got the connection with the university started. So if folks are interested in not only creating a sort of a pipeline of membership, but also a pipeline of authors, reach out to local universities in your jurisdictions. You will be very surprised by how warmly welcomed that outreach is. The only other thing I wanted to say on how you solicit member participation is there is like no bound to the topics that people can write on, which I think sometimes folks think like, oh, I have to write a Supreme Court article. No, you can talk about, anything that is happening that touches on an international legal aspect, which is pretty fun for those of us who just love entertainment law or want to write about the Real Housewives of Mexico City. Like that can be an article. So I'll pause there and see if you have any other questions.
Yeah, no, that's great. I also, I'm a professor at GW, and I really love the idea of getting students involved. I mean, even if you don't have necessarily sort of a formal affiliation with the university, all of the committees, of course, have student members. And I think one great way, I think, of getting students engaged in your committee so that they'll stay members when they become actually lawyers and start being paying members of both the ABA and our section. One great way is for them to work on both editing the newsletter, helping getting it out, but also write some pieces for it. And that's something, really, I think that's so beneficial to them and to the committee. So I really like that. I wanted to emphasize that. Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I guess, is you don't have to do a whole lot of enticing, I guess, but how do you explain sort of the benefits of participation for folks? I mean, I don't think there are some committees that may feel like they're gonna have to struggle even to just find who their newsletter vice chair is going to be for the year, much less get people really engaged. Which sort of your spiel here for enticement?
I think I have a few different things. The first is just publication in an ABA publication, which is impressive. The second is editing of writing by some of the best writers around, especially for folks who have English as a second language. It can be incredibly impactful for them. I've gotten emails from our newsletter authors thanking me for some of my more I would say, bloodier edits. And I think that's, while painful, can be really helpful for people. And for non-students and maybe folks who are in the US legal market, I have found a lot of benefits in helping them like publicize pro bono stories or stories that are important to their work. So for example, at WilmerHale, we have a particular interest in environmental justice and in international environmental human rights. And we have had a lot of infirm interest in publishing pieces about our pro bono clients in that space.
That's great. Yeah, yeah.
I also wanted to just give one caution about the urge to over edit people's work. Many of us have been trained by the best of the best in terms of writing. And I have learned the hard way that sometimes people don't react super well to over editing. So let the person's voice speak for themselves, but make them sound as good as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think I agree with that as well. Awesome. Now, in terms of, like I said, the team, you mentioned, of course, you've got the student, the university group, but maybe either thinking about how they're organized or how you might organize if you did, perhaps before you had that connection. What might your team look like? I mean, everybody, I guess, has sort of the newsletter sort of vice chair, but then, what's a good number or, for number of people to participate, and what sort of different roles might they play in terms of helping getting the newsletter out?
I find that the more hands that are involved, the better. It makes much lighter work. We have 3 vice chairs for the newsletter, and it just makes the editing process quite pleasant. Normally, it's 2 people on reviewing the articles and 1 person on sort of the final layout and soliciting articles. So that's kind of been our sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to make one point about soliciting authors and what that team looks like. I have found that diversity in identity, in thought, in experience makes a newsletter extremely readable. Some of my favorite articles to read and edit have been those with which I vehemently disagreed. And I think that kind of diversity and everywhere helps your newsletter.
Great.
And
Thank you so much. I think that's, go ahead, Andres. Yeah, I was just going to open it up to everybody.
Additional comment to that.
Yeah.
We've been very lucky, and in Mexico, apart from having the Mexico committee, there are a lot of international law section members in Mexico City. So we a few years ago we launched a Mexico City committee, an international chapter of Mexico City, and what we have doing lately, because it's a work that had been reorganized in the past recent months with the prior leadership of the committee. Actually, we have been doing a lot of work together with the Mexican bar associations. As you probably know, Mexico, different than the US, we don't have a mandatory bar. It's a voluntary bar, and we have various bar associations. Probably we have 3, which are the most important in terms of activism, number of membership, and representation throughout the Mexican territory, which are the Mexican Bar, the ANADE, which is the Associations of Business Lawyers, and the Ilustre Nacional Colegio de Abogados. I would say this is the oldest bar association in the continent. It was recently created after Spain got into the Mexican territory. And we have been doing a lot of work with them that encompasses various topics. We have discussing a lot about the rule of law and rule of law initiatives. We have been working with Alvar Rowley, but also it is important for us to communicate that. So we have also devoted part of our newsletter We have offered members of the Mexican bars to also participate. And the recent edition of the newsletter, actually, we had very good participation from the Mexican bars. So we are also trying to encourage that to get this more fluid participation with the Mexican bars, and to encourage them to make some articles for our newsletter.
Yeah, I love the collaboration aspect of it, and wanted to. I mean, you're thinking about reaching out beyond the ABA and beyond the committee to other organizations, which is one way, one great collaboration. Another thing I wanted to suggest to folks is collaborating among committees within the international law section, right? If one committee, if a couple of different committees have sort of an interesting, co-interest in something, you can bring different perspectives, right? And do, either seek out authors and the like from other sections, and or sort of just publish a newsletter that's sort of co-authored or co-produced by both committees. I think that's a great way to sort of create more synergies within the section and get to know folks beyond your committee too. I know there's a lot of overlapping issue, a lot of overlapping topics. So Kelsey, Kelsey, you'd already, Kelly, did you have anything else that you wanted to, or Kelsey, of course you can, if you have anything more to add too, but I was wondering if you wanted to add anything additional, Kelly, before we move on to our last topic.
Yeah, just very briefly. I appreciate what you said about not over editing and letting authors keep their voices, because that's hard. And I think that's something that we all struggle with, but it's very good to keep in mind. I wanted to ask also, you talked about articles with which you may strongly disagree and having some diversity of opinions. On the Middle East Committee, this is always, of course, an issue. And so we try very hard to keep an open platform for dialogue, but also keep that point of respectfulness, and also make it very clear that these are the opinions of legal events by authors. And I was just curious if you have any specific approach to that, or it's just a somewhat organic process.
I think it is organic. There is we don't really have a structure for it. And it's just the editors just like putting on their pure editorial hat. And I don't mean editorial in the sense of like a newspaper editorial decisions, but just editing the line by line work. And frankly, I think the ones that we disagree with often are the strongest articles, because we're pushing back the most and making sure that this person's analysis and logic is airtight. So it's a challenge. I don't have any good ideas for you, Kelly, but I do it in the interest of what Joan just said. I am fascinated by the work you do, and I think the Mexico Committee and all of your committees should probably write some articles together.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing you can do, particularly if you've got really competing controversial things, you can have sort of a point counterpoint, right? An article sort of presenting one idea and then a counterpoint presenting the opposing view. And that challenges, as you said, sort of Kelsey, both of them to sort of address each of the other's concerns, perhaps, and you get two articles that are really quite well drafted from both perspectives. And then it also shows there's sort of, you're not necessarily, doesn't look like you're endorsing any one side or the other, because you've got sort of both perspectives discussed. And I will say, I think every newsletter at the bottom, at the opening of the page, whenever you read any type of newsletter by an organization, they always say, the views that are expressed in this newsletter are those of solely the author, not of, the American Bar Association, the International Law Section, the Mexico Committee, or anybody else, right? That is always that disclaimer. Because I think that we're all lawyers, right? We know that that's sort of important just to have that disclaimer, because in fact, that is really what you're promoting. It's just really the view of the author. There hasn't been like a vote of the committee. We all accept this article to be published and agree with what it says. And obviously certain topic areas have much more controversial issues than other topic areas might have, but everybody at some point runs into sort of that controversial question. All right, well, let's turn to our last topic, Andres, and this is sort of the nuts and bolts side of putting a newsletter together. The committee is really responsible for literally publishing the newsletter, right? So once you have the content, the question is, now what do you do with it, right? How do you get it literally published, formatted, right, get the pictures and stuff together and actually get it on, get it out the door. I guess the first question is always sort of software, right? What type of software are you familiar with or do you use? Are there, different things to think about in terms of selecting the software to actually publish it? You're on mute. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry, and sure. And as previously Kelsey mentioned, we are very lucky to have this collaboration with the Universidad Panamericana in Guadalajara, and they make our lives much easier on this regard. We normally request the articles in Word versions. So we receive that, we review it, we edit it, and we put it together with the publisher platform or tool. So they are very familiar with that tool. They make all the integration of the different articles. They turn it into a PDF document, which is the final document that we just give a quick look after the editing work is done. And then they make the final details to get it published. So we normally use the publisher tool for doing that. Previously, we do it on a more handcraft way, using Word and PDF documents. I think that the most important part, obviously, is the content. But I mean, if you use some specific tools for this, you can make your life a little bit easier and probably get a better layout of the document that is more readable, that it's more appealing to the eye of the reader. So again, we are very lucky to having this great group of work from the Universidad Panamericana that help us using these software tools.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that's also related to sort of formatting things and stuff too. I mean, depending upon the software you're using, it's easier to sort of bring in photos, and whether you have like, and just how you format you format it, whether it's in 2 columns or, there's all sorts of different things to play around with. And I know there's a variety of, in fact, we can offer templates. You can look at, folks, you can take a look at what's actually posted on the website. I mean, ultimately, I think it's a PDF that's on the website, but you can reach out to any of, the editors of any of the newsletters that you'll see published on our site and ask them, what did you use to actually get to this final product? I think that can be really helpful. From a standpoint of sort of the production schedule, what does your production schedule look like? I mean, from sort of when do you start, for example, soliciting articles come in, how much time does it take to get it edited? How much time does it take to sort of get through the publication at the school stage? What does your timeline look like? Production timeline.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, the simplest answer would be it depends. But since, as mentioned, we have been doing this for a while, and every time it's getting a little bit better. And since we are trying to include persons that have really committed to the project and to so we try to do this on a quarterly basis. Every 3 months, we try to publish a newsletter. That's our goal. It could be that one time we go a little bit farther for 4 months, for example. And we also take advantage of our monthly calls, in which we discuss several topics, discuss several participations of the Mexican members of the committee, in various events. And we encourage them to write and remind them to write something. We try to set up a deadline of receiving the article so that we can have the time enough to review it, to make the editing process, and to prepare the final layout of the newsletter. So and it is important to have in mind that this is a continuing works, right? I mean, it is not that we stop and we said we some sort of always are always working on this to trying to make everyone to participate. There's sometimes that we receive some articles a little bit later than the deadline has come, and I mean, so it's a continuous work, and we try to publish every 3 months quarterly, but I mean, it would depend of the content that we have in order to make a strong newsletter, right? But I think that's a little bit our time frame. I don't know, Kelsey, if you agree.
Yep, agreed. It's fluid.
Fluid, yeah. Well, I guess, and if you're publishing 4 times a year, you know, when you're finishing one, you just have to be starting the next one. If it takes a couple of months to sort of from beginning to end to get everything through, and you've only got 3 times, 4 times 3 months, so you are sort of, I'm in the International Animal Law Committee, and we try to get a newsletter out twice a year. So I wouldn't say we're working on it all the time. Maybe it takes, but it's from the time we might like have the articles, we say try to get them in by October 1, and then we're hoping to get something out by say December 1, right? And then in April or something, we sort of do it again. It really, and part of that, going back to, it really depends on the resources you have in terms of number of editors working on it and the content and what you have to do. Kelly, did you have any thoughts to add to sort of this sort of technical side of things?
No, because I am not so technologically savvy. But I was curious, do you tend to use a template, or every time it just depends on what you have content wise? I don't know if there's a hard and fast rule or not.
Are you asking Andres or me or
I was asking Kelsey and Andres, but also
Kelsey, yeah, particularly, yeah.
Answer too.
I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, we normally do use a template in Publisher, as Andres said. If anybody has worked with Publisher, it's part of the Microsoft suite, and it's really fantastic. You can quite easily like copy and paste articles in, and photos and little like blurbs in the text. So to the extent that you can use that, it's great. And we just formulate it off that template.
Yeah. I don't know that I don't think I've used that. I've just used Word, by itself, which is not as easy to do. Yeah.
And you have to be familiarized with the platform. I mean,
yeah,
it is more easy for some people and more challenging for others like me. But I fully agree. I think that if you get familiar with the platform, I think it is very helpful. And as Kelly mentioned, we try to we have like a format that we normally use with some table of contents, with some general remarks that the leadership of the committee make every time that we publish a newsletter, and so on and so forth. But yeah.
Great.
And the Young Lawyers Interest Network, they use Canva, which I'm not very familiar with other than my work with that newsletter, but that also seems to be a very effective way to have a template newsletter.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I wanted to, there's a couple more questions I could ask, but and I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat. Does anybody, on that's listening here, we'd like to get you involved if you have any specific questions for any of the panelists. Scott, yeah, I see you came in.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi, it's Scott Shostak. I'm one of the co-chairs, the Eurasia Committee. And so I have like 3 levels of questions. So if a lot of other people have questions, I'll ask one, someone else can jump in, I'll ask another.
Okay.
But so just
go for it. We'll see.
Plus, rumors are I'm a lawyer, so I love to talk. So just interrupt or put moot. Yeah. I'll understand. The first question is republication. And by that, what I mean is Centil is an amazing law firm that comes out monthly, sometimes weekly, with this amazing review of what the financial projects and different deals are being made in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and it's a great resource. I don't see modifying it that much. I have talked to their leadership, and they've agreed that I can republish as long as I acknowledge them. Is there any, like, policy protocol, if 1/3 of the newsletter is simply republication of these law firm newsletters that are very targeted to their clients, but so no one else really sees them, but it's very applicable to Eurasia?
Well, I'd have to reread. We have an author agreement, and Kelly, you may be somewhat familiar with this too, because I know you've with I think this is ABA wide and not just related to newsletters. But certain types of publications, it's harder to get republication. And the author agreement I know that we sign for the newsletter basically says that this is, the ABA is sort of the first publication of the piece, right? Now, it's possible that you could maybe seek permission through either the copyright folks or whatever, because I know there's a whole copyright area of the ABA for republication of things, but I'd have to, I think, look into that. But my understanding with the author agreements that we have is that this is and I guess this is thinking from the author's perspective, right? It's not like you authored this over here and now you're republishing it here, but that's sort of what you're suggesting, right? And I think you'd have to at least get special permission to do that, at least because they couldn't sign the author agreement that I'm thinking about that we typically sign for our authors. Kelly, do you know anything more about that, given your sort of ILN work?
I think that's pretty much accurate. One of the things we sometimes will do is, rather than fully just not accept the piece, is to suggest perhaps you paraphrase it and you cite to the other publication. And so you are creating an original work. You don't have to throw everything out, but you don't necessarily republish word for word. And so you can always provide something shorter in summary and then cite back to the original publication. But even in that case, I have always asked that they get explicit permission also from the original publisher, because I think you're setting to their work, it should be okay. But as lawyers, I think that's just the safe way to do it. I don't know if the others have other ways in which they've dealt with that, but I haven't seen it too much, but that's generally what we try to suggest.
Yeah. Dan, you have your hand up, and then we'll go back to Scott. Yeah.
Terrific boot camp. So thanks for organizing it and putting it on. I'm from the International Human Rights Committee in the International Law section. And in the past, we've had a newsletter, but for several years not, because the person who was most interested in doing it just burned out. And one of my questions is, what do you do? It seems one of the reasons for the burnout was the extraordinary time commitment that it took to edit and also to try to assure quality control. And so I guess one of my questions is how you manage that, besides what I've heard you say, one of the speakers say previously, you have a bunch of editors and so you share the burden. But I'm just wondering also about the quality control aspect of it. And you offend authors if the article is really poorly written, if you send it back to them and say we can't publish it that way, or here's some suggestions, but it's really a mess. So I just wonder what people's experiences are with managing the editorial responsibilities.
Kelsey,
I brought up the over editing portion, so I'll try to field this. I'm not going to lie, it's difficult. And I like to think that it's really given me a lot of managerial practice. And I think maybe framing it like that to younger lawyers is helpful, and then continuing to pass the baton to younger lawyers to do it could help with a little bit of the burnout. I also just think that at a certain point, this is an ABA publication and you need it to be the best that it can possibly be. And I have found that in the vast majority of cases, authors are very grateful for the amount of time that you took to edit their work, even if it was sort of painful. That's not entirely responsive to your question, but I will say that it is hard, and that my advice for managing the burnout is to not leave an editor hanging by themselves for too long.
Yeah. Well, you can also just adjust like the length and the amount that you're publishing, right? It's much easier to publish, let's say, 2 articles, and a spotlight on a member than to get 5, long articles out or whatever. I mean, so, you can sort of scale, right, the newsletter in that regard too, I think. Kelly, you're going to jump in and say something. Yeah.
Yeah, I just briefly. So the Middle East Committee does not have a vice chair for publications this year. And so the way in which we're managing it is I, myself, and 2 other fairly engaged members have volunteered to informally assist. But the way in which I think it's going to have to work is we can't publish as many newsletters as we would. And so right now we're focusing on the year in review, and I hope we'll get at least 1 more newsletter out, maybe also do a special edition again in January. But realistically speaking, unless we have a lot of leadership or members who we know we can count on to provide quality work, it's going to be a question just of what's feasible. But we try to put out at least 1 or 2 every year. But again, maybe they're shorter.
Yeah. Yeah, both the number that you put out and the length of them and how substantive they are, right? I mean, those are the 2 other things. Yeah. I hope that was helpful, Dan. Scott, we have time at least for one more of your questions. Let's see. Depends on how long it takes.
It may be a simple answer, but having non-members write the articles, not just members.
Yeah, that is definitely allowed, is my understanding. I mean, and very often you might reach out to, partners at your firm or associates at your firm, or that's a firm, or like I bring in students, like, for example, here at GW, even if they're not ABA members. I think anyone can write for an ABA publication. So absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Did you have anything else? I know to the website. Yeah, I think we did. Or let's see, was there a link to that? I guess we haven't put that in yet. I do have, hold on a second. Yeah, I have the link here. Excuse me, I have trouble doing more than one thing at the same time. This is the, well, that's Q&A. Go to the chat. This is the link to where all of the newsletters can be found. And while we're talking about this, first of all, Lavinia is online here as ILS. And the first thing I want to say is a huge thank you to Lavinia, first of all, for coordinating this panel and helping us coordinate the panel. And secondly, for just all the support that she gives to the publications team, myself and Robin and several of us that are working on the publications for the section. She's a fabulous resource. And many of you, I think all of you know Lavinia because she's also sort of the main contact with the committees. And she helps us in a lot of various regards. So huge thank you to Lavinia. And then related to that, when you are done with your newsletter, right, you obviously post it on your communities page so that all of your members will see it. But you also want to send a copy to Lavinia, and that's basically how she'll coordinate getting it on this page so that the entire international law section has access to your newsletter as well. And we would love to see, everybody's newsletters out there. And it's hard to know, right, unless we've got some 30 or something. I don't know. We have a lot of committees, right? And it isn't like we can sort of follow what every committee is doing and whether you're publishing newsletters or not. We really do have to rely on you to sort of get the communications out to the rest of the section so that we can get them posted. I guess if there's not any other questions, I just would like to wrap up. And say, first of all, thank you so much to our fabulous, in addition to thanking Lavinia, thank you so much to our great panelists here, Andres, Kelly, Kelsey. You really share a lot of great information. I'm sure that you would be willing to answer questions if folks would like to email you if they have any specific questions. And I'd also like to say, as for our publications team, we're here to help you. We put on this webinar and I know there were a lot of questions about it. We're hoping that this answered at least some of your questions, but if you have any questions about newsletters or really any other aspect of publications with the section, please feel free to get in touch with us. We have the the publications listserv that we now sort of to bring all the vice chairs of publications together. But you can email me personally. I'll just put my email in the chat. Or you can contact Lavinia and she can, get in touch with us as well. But we're more than happy to help folks if you have specific questions about newsletters or any other aspects of publications in the section. So with that, like I said, thank you all so much. I'm glad that you've attended. We've been recording it, and obviously we'll be putting the recording up for those who weren't able to come. But thank you all very, very much. And we'll look forward to reading your newsletters as they get published this year. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.